The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of the host or the podcast. Additionally, opinions of the host and guests are just that, opinions. Any political commentary or discussions of public figures are shared as personal opinions for conversational and entertainment purposes only. This content is not intended as professional, medical, legal, or financial advice. And with that, enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Pivot Stories with Leona Hatcher. I'm your host, Leona Hatcher. Welcome to the podcast where we explore the moments that disrupt our lives, challenge our identities, and ultimately lead us into something that is deeper, freer, and more aligned. I'm so happy that you're here with me today. Happy Sunday. And I hope that you're having a great start to your week. Hope that you had a great brunch and that you had a great sermon at church today. I know I did. And I hope that you had a great walk in the park or whatever it is that you did to start your week off right. I hope that you did that. So, what I wanted to do today is have a conversation about an article that I read last week in the Wall Street Journal. And I believe I even posted this on my Instagram because I thought it was very eye-opening and it reiterated some of what Ekemini Owan and I were having a conversation about in last week's episode. If you haven't caught that episode, please do. You're missing out. She's amazing. The way she really poured into me and into all of you that watched. I'm sure she said had some nuggets in there that really inspired you. I want for every guest that comes on this podcast to have that same energy. This is a space where we're uplifting each other and giving good advice and encouragement and all of those things. This is not a space for any sort of hater attitudes or crabs in the barrel or there's not enough for us, for all of us to win type of mentality. She is the exact person I wanted to set the tone. And so I'm so happy that she was able to make it on. So now that being said, let's go into why we're here today and because I will digress all day. And let's go ahead and take a look at this article. So it was an article written in the Wall Street Journal. The author is Ray A. Smith. Always want to give props to the writer and the author of the article, the writer of the article. And I believe the headline speaks for itself. Done with corporate life, Black women are starting businesses in droves. You know, I felt this, we knew this, but the article is going into detail as to why that is. And it goes on to say Black women are becoming entrepreneurs at a faster clip or rate than any other demographic, and a chillier corporate world has a lot to do with it. Now, whether you're in corporate or in, I don't know, medicine or any other field, um, you can tell oftentimes when there's a shift, and you can feel when the tides are turning. I mean, you can't really put your finger on it. And what this article did so well is that it essentially broke down why so many Black women are turning to entrepreneurship in droves. And it breaks down what is happening in America right now. And it lets you make your own decisions and determination as to why that is happening. It gives you all of the data and it says here. Now, think about your situation or think about this situation, whether it impacted you or not, and deduce, right, or derive from this information what is actually happening and what are the larger implications. And I really appreciated how the writer of this article did this. So it basically profiles at least about three Black women entrepreneurs in this article. This woman here, Regina Lawless Tony, she was actually she left her six figure job at Instagram, um, where she was the head of DEI efforts. She either left or was laid off and started her own coaching business, a lucrative coaching business. Um, it goes on to also profile Erin Giddens, who she long dreamed of becoming an entrepreneur. Then she was laid off and she decided to pursue that on her own, to pursue her dreams. And I think one of the things that Ekemini mentioned last week is that a lot of the times we are quote unquote resorting, which is odd that we have to resort to our passions because that should be the first place that we go when we're thinking about our life and our career, but we are so programmed to think about whether you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, or I don't know, a salesman, or any of these other like traditional career paths, and we don't think about what excites us and makes us happy, and as far as that becoming a career, because you know that can't possibly be lucrative. It's a shift in perspective and consciousness, and I think that's actually happening right now. And I know that there are all of these negative headlines, and rightly so, about what is occurring. But I believe there's a shift that's going to work to our benefit in the long run, and maybe it's just me being hopeful, con continuously hopeful. I think, but I do believe deep down that that's what's occurring right now. This shift in consciousness is going to be to our benefit. I know it. So, let me just get into the article because I will ramble. But many pandemic era efforts to help Black women and minority groups advance up the corporate ladder have fallen away as companies have retreated from diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So have their promotions up and down the ladder. The rate of Black women elevated to senior vice president roles fell to 1% in 2025 from 4% the year before, while promotions for all women held steady at 4%. So promotions for Black women fell to 1% from 4%, but promotions for all women held steady at 4. Keep that in mind. According to a study of 9,500 employees and 124 companies. Okay, so that's from 124 companies. It's quite a bit, quite a big sample size. Within the C-suite, Black women were promoted at a rate of 1% in 2025 compared to 8% in 2024. It's quite a drop. It's quite a dip. I think for me, what stands out is that they profiled 124 companies and about 9,500 employees. That's quite a bit. But 124 companies, I'm assuming that this was across industry, across the country. So whether it's the South, the Midwest, the Northeast, um, out West, this is happening everywhere, right? So it doesn't necessarily matter where we're at geographically within the United States. This is happening everywhere. If it's 124 companies. And Black women being promoted at a rate of 1%. 1% of all the Black women employees were promoted in 2025. That's insane. I believe 8% is also low, quite low in my opinion. There was a lot of work to do there. We needed improvement at 8%, but we digressed at such a rate in 2025. That to me seems intentional. It doesn't seem like happenstance. This is not happening because it was a outlier or a blip, right? This is intentional, and we'll go into that as to why I think it's intentional. So some Black women have dropped out of the workforce altogether, and female unemployment climbed to 7.1% from 5.5% a year ago. The number of Black women-owned businesses rose, however, right? Where everything else has fallen as far as promotion and employment. Black women-owned businesses rose about 13% last year, more than any other racial group of men or women, according to 2026 reports from Wells Fargo and consulting firm Ventureneer. So this goes back to necessity versus anything else when it comes to Black women entrepreneurship. Rose about 13% last year. If our promotion rates are falling drastically, right? 1% for senior compared to 4%. And it was 8% in 2024 compared to 1%. I'll be curious. I thought there were C-suite numbers in here. I think it's further down in the article. But I'd be curious what C-suite in general look like. Um, and then the jobs numbers, right, in terms of unemployment for Black women, climbed to 7.1% from 5.5% the year before. Yikes, right? This is necessity. 13% of Black women-owned businesses is mostly necessity, right? It's survival. However, even though we are, right, and that's my guesstimation that it is survival. It has to be. Even though we are owning businesses now at a higher rate than any other year, or for any or more than any other racial group of men or women, right? The climate for burden entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs of color is also getting tougher, right? So there's more of us, but it's getting tougher. Not because there's more competition, okay? Keep that in mind. It's not because of competition. The share of venture capital funding going to Black-owned businesses in 2025 was 0.3%, the lowest share in a decade. And I'm kicking myself because I didn't do numbers as to what that number was in previous years, but the article indicates it's the lowest share in a decade. Crunchbase data show. Um, I recently went to a couple years ago the Fearless Moguls, the Fearless Foundation promoted event. Ariane Simone, who owns that venture capital fund that helps Black women start businesses and grow their businesses. Um, and I was able to receive funding for my small business back in 2023, but a lot of Black women that I spoke to at that event didn't even bother asking for investors or asking for funding for whatever reason, because the idea is that it's too difficult to get it. So I'll just do it on my own. I'll save my money, while in my corporate 9 to 5 job, and I'll put money aside so I can start my business or ask family and friends. This woman, Erin Giddens, who started, I believe her organization, her company is called Tea Cakes and Tells, right? Um, she said that she hasn't sought outside investors. That's very common in the among Black women owned among Black women business owners. Very common to not seek outside investors. Says the challenges are worth it because she's able to build something of her own. The Black women own 2.9 million businesses, about 18% of all women-owned companies in the United States, according to the report. And this is Crunchbase. But they tend to get less outside financing and have weaker professional networks than any other group, making it harder to scale. Hmm. On average, they generated $41,000 in 2025 revenue, compared to 179,000 for all women-owned businesses, according to the report. And I believe that has a lot to do because it's in the same paragraph of the statistic that showed about 18% of all women-owned companies in the United States are Black women, but they tend to get less funding. That's because they don't have the funding, right? If you don't have the money to market, if you don't have the funding to grow your business, you're going to earn less money. And there is a correlation there, in my opinion. Um, and it also got me to think that a lot of these women who have gotten laid off were laid off from six-figure jobs. These are professional people. Um, at least the two women that were in this article, and I can also speak for myself. However, they have you. have a hard time reaching that $100,000 mark for their own business, which doesn't make sense because a lot of the times we were playing an integral part in helping these $1 million businesses, right? Get to their metrics and their marks. We meet our metrics, we're promoted, we are, um, great workers and go-getters. And that doesn't stop when we start our own businesses. Um, but it begs the question, you know, you have to look behind the data. It's not because of lack of trying, it's because we don't have the funding in order to get us there. For example, Regina Lawless Tony left a six-figure job heading DI efforts at Instagram, and I mentioned her previously. So she left in 2023 to start a consulting and coaching business for Black professional women. She says she didn't even consider venture capital funding for a business. Again, um, n knowing how little goes to Black female founders. So, because she knew how little goes to Black female funders, she says it wasn't worth it. She decided to put her energy elsewhere, which is unfortunate, but she's accurate. Um, she explained she has expanded into human resource consulting. Good for her, which brought on coaching clients and does speaking engagements and workshops with companies. Yet the revenues and returns have been uneven. So, something else that I wanted to profile here, um, and this is my the next thing that we're going to talk about. But before that, let me not get off track too much. I want to talk about and the article talks about this too, but I want to share something, a personal anecdote. In 2020, after George Floyd's murder, the company that I was working for was a financial technology firm, and they set up programs in the aftermath of George Floyd's killing to help Black entrepreneurs grow their business or start their business, which I thought was pretty awesome. Whether they're doing that still, I don't know. However, the trend has been that all of those programs have been rolled back. Um, for example, the article says it is more challenging to launch Black-owned businesses now than in the aftermath of George Floyd's 2020 murder. The flood of corporate initiatives launched then, many of them to support Black entrepreneurs with more access to capital, have since subsided amid legal and political backlash against DEI related programs. So, yeah. So a lot of organizations, if they with the rollback, right, and the essential erasure of DEI mandated by the Trump administration, a lot of organizations have rolled back any DEI programs, even those related to supporting Black-owned businesses as a result of Trump era policies that essentially want to or sought to eradicate DEI. One of the first was the Fearless Foundation, a venture capital firm founded to bridge the capital funding gap for women of color. There's a typo there. Bridge the capital funding gap, or maybe cap, I don't know, for women of color, but I think yeah, it's a typo. Yikes. Um, which closed, so the Fearless Fund closed its grants program for Black female entrepreneurs in 2024 as part of a legal settlement over claims that the program violated an anti-discrimination statute. And we're going to get into that. Very interesting. Um, it closes out this section of the article by saying, in all, Black-funded U.S. startups receive 937 million in funding in 2025. Okay, not bad. But when you compare that to being less than fifth of the record 5.2 billion that black businesses raised in 2021, according to Crunchbase. So 937 million seems okay. However, when you juxtaposition that against the 5.2 billion that Black-owned businesses raised in 2021. Um, it's clearly a drop, which also makes it seem deliberate. See, the thing about data and statistics is that one statistic on its own could be an outlier, it could be cause for concern, but when you see trends happening that indicate that a certain group, right, the same trend is happening, it looks deliberate. A drop in promotions, 300,000 Black women in the public sector being laid off. Um, Almost the same amount, I believe, being laid off in the public sector. I believe the number is over 600,000. Um, I've heard 800,000 in some cases, but close to 600,000, right? Where there's a little bit more, a little bit less Black women in general, in total, from the private and the public sector being laid off. And then you look at unemployment numbers. You look at the fact that we're starting businesses at a higher rate, but we're receiving less funding. And less funding is common with for Black women, right? Black women in business, which is why even someone as impressive as the former head of DEI for Instagram, she wouldn't even think of seeking out funding because we receive it at such a low level, right? Someone even with her expertise doesn't think that she has a chance. That's how little we get funding, right, as Black women. So even someone like that is this basically taking it off the table as an option. An impressive resume, right? I digress. Even though we started businesses at a higher rate than any other gender or racial group, we receive less funding. That is, to me, very targeted. We're being targeted on all ends. So, yeah. Um, this is Sharice Williams, the founder of Inside the Huddle and co-founder of Next Level Partners. Um, Also very impressive. I don't have because I don't want this video to be too long, I don't want to necessarily go into her story, but she's pretty impressive herself. But she talks about anxiety in corporate America, and it's harder right now to find people to invest in the business if it appears they're just investing in a Black woman. I took a course a long time ago. My professor was a mentor of mine when I was thinking about starting a business um, after college. And it was the course is called Black Sheep of Fundraising, and he essentially basically outlined categories of people that are considered black sheep in fundraising, people who are least likely to get funding. And it was a friend of mine at the time, and we were having conversations about starting a nonprofit or starting a business. And he basically told us that this is a white man who was in his 90s at the time. He'd retired, but I went to seek his advice because he'd been such a great mentor when I took his class. He looked at us and said, "You guys are brilliant. You have great ideas, but it's going to be very difficult for you to get funding because you're a Black woman." He said, "I'm just going to be honest with you." And so I still have his book, Black Sheep of Fundraising. And yeah, I mean, that was 2004. It is now 2026. And what upsets me about this court case with the Fairless Foundation, and we just get into that now, is that let me just go ahead and stop sharing and I'll bring up the article with Ariane Simone. Is that this is nothing new. Black women have always been on the end of receiving less funding for their businesses, receiving less promotions, but somehow certain people have gotten it in their head that we are getting too much, right? And the reason why we're getting the little that we are getting, when you look at statistics, right, is because we didn't earn it, but because of the color of our skin, we got a leg up when all the data shows that we are disenfranchised when it comes to not just earning potential, right, for in corporate America, but earning potential in entrepreneurship. We are disenfranchised when it comes to funding for entrepreneurship. Even though the data shows that, they have it in their head that the little that we've gotten is because we don't deserve it. When the mere reason why those programs existed was because we do deserve it. But the programs existed to give us an opportunity to compete. I was a recruiter for many years, right? For over 10 years. Towards the middle of my career, I got involved in DEI recruiting. And the misconception about diversity, equity, and inclusion recruiting is that we make spaces for people or opportunities for people that don't deserve it. That is categorically false. No one have ever recruited into a role or a hiring manager hired for a role ever got the role because they were Black, they were Hispanic, they were female. They received the role because they had the experience and the knowledge, and they were the best person for the role. The reason why DEI recruiting, for example, exists is because, and I'm going to be very honest with you, if you have a hiring manager who, and this is human nature, if you have a hiring manager who went to, let's say, Purdue, and for example, I'm not calling out Purdue, but this is an example. I could even say XYZ school. That went to XYZ school and was an XYZ fraternity. And everybody in the XYZ fraternity was a white male, right? Um, then you have within finance, for example, look at the demographics of the people who are in finance, white and male. The chances of a hiring manager in finance being white and male is markedly increased, right? Because that's the demographic, right? If you have a manager that went to XYZ school and was at XYZ fraternity, who do you think they're going to hire? Somebody who looks like me that went to ABC school and was never in ABC fraternity? Or the young white man that comes to him with a similar background and a similar story? I am not relatable to him. He's not relatable to me. Regardless to what my resume and my GPA says, the preference is going to go to who you relate to. And this is not me calling it racism, it's relatability, right? It is what it is. And that's what the most well-intentioned person, they're not conscious of the decision because they're going towards who is their peer, who is the person they can relate to more. It's an unconscious bias. So most DEI programs are set up to combat unconscious bias. So I would go to historically Black colleges, Hispanic serving organizations, women's colleges to recruit from that pool. Because the more of those people I put in a pool of candidates, the higher the chances that they may be recruited for the job. And we also had unconscious bias training for these hiring managers. So they can see where their cultural blind spots were, right? They could understand why they have unconscious bias, and they can ultimately make the decision that benefits the company, right? Not just what benefits who they can have a beer with and kiki after work. Like, really. And that's it in a nutshell. No one ever got hired. And let me not leave out veterans because majority of my work was with veterans. A veteran comes out of, I don't know, let's say the Air Force, right? And he's looking for a job, has all of these skills. Like, I'm thinking of one veteran in particular. This guy was amazing. His skills were absolutely awesome. He was a young man of color, believe Hispanic descent, but a leader, you can see it. Um, that training was impeccable, right? He had all, but his resume read like, it had all of these classifications based on the military, and the verbiage and the jargon was like very difficult to understand. So part of my training was to learn how to translate those skills into corporate language. And so I would help with the translation of the resume. And then because that needed to happen, and there were not a lot of resources to do that. So the company I worked for provided that resource for veterans, through the recruiters. And my job was to essentially put resumes forth by put his resume forward to the hiring manager so they can see the transferable skills. And he was hired onto the role and like literally took off. And I don't know what he's doing now, but I'm sure it's something amazing. When I left that organization, he was already like promoted, like I don't know, a couple of times, or was about to be promoted. I don't know. But he did an amazing job. And there's so many other cases when it comes to students that were recruited from HBCUs, um, women's colleges, etc., that I can name that had a similar experience at the organizations that I work for. So DEI recruiting was to essentially bridge the gap, right? A hiring manager looking at a resume for someone that's of a military background is not going to get it. It was my job to bridge that gap so they can see the transferable skills, and that's what I did. And so that unconscious bias was no longer there, and they can actually see the candidate for who they are, and they can hire the best person for the job. So I went into that because I really wanted to make that clear because it upsets me when I hear folks say that DEI was set up so that people can get an unfair advantage. Categorically false. You are dumb. I'm sorry. You need to read. If that's what you think, you need to read more. And you need to talk to more people. You need to get from outside your box because that is categorically false. All right. Um, so let me go ahead and get into the next story here. Got a little warm, but it upsets me so much. Like yeah. So the next story, let's see, is goes into the Fearless Foundation. And this impressive young woman, Ariane Simone. I love this lady. So this is Ariane Simone and Ayanna Parsons. I believe it's her co-founder or partner at the Fearless Foundation. The Time Magazine article says they didn't plan to be at the center of a civil rights battle. Then the Fearless Fund was sued, essentially. And I'm gonna go into what happened with this case, but I want to give you a little backstory about Miss Ariane Simone and do a little story time. In 2023, I got an email inviting me to a Fearless Foundation conference called Fearless Moguls. And my ticket was free. I think at one point the tickets were they were at a price, but I had been laid off and so I had been very and I hadn't received my funding for my small business yet. So I was very strategic and conservative about how I spend and where I spent my money. And the idea of taking a trip out of town just didn't seem like it was beneficial at the time or just wise money decision or wise financial decision. So I decided that okay, I'm probably not gonna go when I initially saw the conference. But a couple of days or a week before, I believe, it was like not even a whole week, I got an email saying, "Hey, guess what? Tickets are now free. We decided to open it up and make it free to so that folks can come to this conference." And I said, okay, well, let me use some of my points for my travel card and, get my behind, to Atlanta. So I did. And let me see. Can you see? Let me make stop share and then I think you can see it, but let me go back. This is me at the Fearless Fund, Fearless Moguls event, just cheesing, just happy to be there. Okay. And from the step and repeat, like I was here and I saw the whole thing. Okay. And this is a panel that I sat in on. Okay. This is a panel that I sat in on. And yeah, you can see it. This is a panel that I sat in on, and the panel consists of uh CEOs from companies that receive funding from venture capitalist funding from the Fearless Fund. Okay. And I don't remember, I know this the young woman with the mic and the pink jacket was she has a beauty brand. And I think the young lady next to her also has a beauty brand, but I can't match them. I was trying to do research before I started to see, okay, who is who. But I wasn't able to really match them with their company, so I don't want to, you know, mislabel what they did or who they are and what their company is. But I do know that among the beauty brands that receive funding from the Fearless Fund, was the Lip Bar, Bread Beauty, um, Range Beauty, and I believe the young woman in the sort of like off the shoulder. I believe that is the founder of Range Beauty. So th those are just a few of the beauty brands that were funded by the Fearless Fund. And essentially, this panel was basically them talking about their journey and how well they're doing, and some of the pitfalls and the hiccups that they had to endure, the challenges, and how they started and where they're at now. It was very informative. I really enjoyed it. And I have a picture of this somewhere, but there was a young woman that started a pet treat company, I believe. And she was like 17 when she started it, and she received venture capitalist funding, and she's a millionaire. Like it was amazing. Like among all of the impressive people that were at this conference, the young women, the teenagers that were just doing it in a way that I would have never thought of at 15 and 17 years old blew my mind. At the end of that conference, just from their stories alone, I was glowing from the inside out with pride. I'm so happy that I went because y'all, we're just awesome. I don't even know what to say. Like it was so informative, but the inspiration that I received, really gave me the motivation to keep going. Even when sometimes I'm like, what am I doing? Is this gonna work? I think back at some of those stories and I use some of the affirmations that I learned from this event because it really was impactful. Okay. And then we're gonna go, let's see, to Miss Arian Simone. Let me stop sharing. And I think I have a picture of her. Yeah. Let's see. Can you see it? Oh, it says Sharon has paused. Okay. Let me stop share and go back. One of these days I will figure this out. Okay. There we go. Okay. So this is Miss Arian Simone. And I took a picture at the very moment of when she was essentially telling the story of how she got started. And what I didn't know about her was that she'd been a business owner since her university, since her college days. And I believe even at college, like she was making her money. She was as a successful businesswoman as she should. She was making her money and she had a storefront at like a local mall or something, which is pretty impressive. And part of the reason why, or the reason why she started the Fearless Fund was because she wanted to inspire other Black women to do the same, to reach their entrepreneurial goals. And she wanted to help them with a leg up with funding and show them the way. I mean, She walks the walk and she talks the talk so many times that, women talk about being girls and, supporting other women. And that this is not like specific to Black women. All women, I think, sometimes struggle with that because oftentimes it's difficult to show up for people in a way that no one showed up for you. You have to essentially teach someone how to show up, I think. And if that hasn't been poured into you, it's very hard to pour that into other people because you cannot pour from an empty cup. And I realized that about not just women, but I think um women within the Black community in general. I think it's difficult because oftentimes, especially when you're in corporate America, for example, you're in business, um, it's a dog eat dog, and it's like they make you believe that there's only a spot for one person, and oftentimes, like, oh, all the time, it is so false because you don't know how many times like I wanted to shake some of the Black women that I worked with and say, "Girl, like, wake up! If we band together." There is no telling what we can do. Okay. But you allow them to pit us against each other because you are convinced that there's only spot for one. But I digress. But Miss Arian is not that type of person. She's not that type of leader. And I love that about her. Um, so let me go back into the article that talked about her, what happened to her and to the Fearless Fund in 2023. Again, they didn't plan to be at the center of a civil rights battle, then the Fearless Fund was sued. The Fearless Fund was sued. And let me see this article. I didn't really go into this article too deep because I heard it from her at the event, and so already I knew about the court case, and I read about it prior to going. Um, but the article says on August 2nd, the American Alliance for Equal Rights, an oxymoron, if you ask me. Like this is the fact that they call themselves the American Alliance for Equal Rights and they're so like the opposite is amazing. The American Alliance for Equal Rights, an organization led by Edward Bloom, the architect of the affirmative action cases decided by the Supreme Court in June. And so that's the court cases that he brought against affirmative action because he feels that affirmative action is unconstitutional. So in this court case, which in this case, in which the court struck down race-based college admissions programs, right? That's the affirmative action cases. Filed a federal civil lawsuit against the Fearless Fund. So the same guy who brought the court cases, the architect of the affirmative action cases that struck down race-based college admissions, filed a federal civil rights suit against the Fearless Fund. Now, this tells me two things. One, this man is a racist, allegedly. Two, um, the Fearless Fund was a threat because they were doing big things for Black women-owned businesses. So he filed a suit against the Fearless Fund as management and the nonprofit Fearless Foundation. It alleges that Fearless engages in racial discrimination by operating the Fearless Strivers Grant, in which the foundation has awarded 10,000 to 20,000 and business development services to early stage Black women-owned businesses. He sued because Black women were given 10 to $20,000 for their businesses. Now, don't get me wrong, 10 to $20,000 is a lot of money for a small business, for a startup in the early stage. That goes to show you, but sorry, my ADD brain. I'm already thinking of my next thought. But yeah, so 10 to $20,000 is a lot of money for someone who's starting off as a business. But in the grand scheme of things. 10 to $20,000 is marketing, right? It's investment in technology. It is money to get started. This will not sustain you. So he's saying, I'm going to cut you off at the knee before you even start. That's what I want to do. I don't even want you to get a I don't even want you to start. This is starter. This is basic, fundamental starter money. This man goes on to say that our nation, I don't even want to quote him, but I want you to hear his thought process because I think this is important to understand. A la Nelson Mandela. You gotta know them. Our nation's civil rights laws do not permit racial distinctions because some racial groups are overrepresented in various endeavors, while others are underrepresented. Whom, sir? Whom? Who is underrepresented here? Surely you're not talking about black women. $20,000? He told us the time in an email statement. In September 26, days after the Afrotech talk, a district court in Atlanta rebuffed the alliance's request to temporarily halt Fearless Drivers program. Okay? And I'll go into that a little bit more, give you a little bit more of a personal story from Arian's mouth. Um, what I recall her saying about this when she addressed the Fearless Moguls conference. Then a few days later, a three-judge panel of the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals granted an injunction, putting it on indefinite hold. On January 31st, another three-judge panel of the 11th Circuit Court will hear Fearless attempt to revive the program while the case continues at a lower level. Most legal experts expect the case to ultimately reach the Supreme Court. All right. I'll go into the breakdown. I have some notes of that. Yeah, so one of the things that Arian talked about at the Fearless Foundation as she was going over, this was like September of 2023. Yeah, when I went to that. So that it was just starting. So it was a few months after they initially went to court. One of the things that she was saying, that she shared with us was that initially, so the decisions on the court were solely based on who appointed the judge. When they say there's no partisanship in the judicial branch of government, um, in my opinion, allegedly there is. Okay. Um, but the partisanship, in my opinion, lands on the conservative side. On the conservative side. Because they weren't really looking at the law. I feel like they were looking at their bias. Because for you to say that our nation's civil rights laws do not permit racial distinctions based on racial groups, okay. Some racial groups are overrepresented in various endeavors, and for you and Mr. Bloom, sir, and I say that loosely, in your opinion, this was based on the fact that Black women in this case were overrepresented and other groups like white men are underrepresented. For you to say that, there has to be some intrinsic bias in your argument because just the data alone that I shared earlier from the Wall Street Journal report does not support your claim. And what Arian mentioned was, Miss Simone mentioned, was that the judges that were appointed by Democratic presidents, a la Obama, Miss President Barack Obama, or um, Bill Clinton, said that the Fearless Fund and the Fearless Drivers Grant was not um, their programs are not discriminatory based on race. Okay. However, the judges appointed by Trump, and I don't believe that there were any judges that were appointed by any other Republican president. They might have been, but they sided with the Fearless Fund. But all of the judges that were appointed by Trump um, sided with Bloom and his organizations and the American Alliance for Equal Rights organization. They sided with them. Clearly an agenda. Upon further research, this is something that was constructed. All of these cases and the attack, I believe, on funding and organizations that help support people of color, particularly Black women, was orchestrated by the infamous Project 2025. I implore you to go read all 1,000 or so, 900 something or so pages, because a lot of what's happening right now, especially when it comes to these topics, it's all outlined in there. This is targeted, this is intentional. Okay. So this was a Time Magazine article. In terms of the breakdown for the case, which is what I'm going to get into next. So the Fearless Fund case was a landmark 2023 to 2024 legal battle over a grant contest, as we talked about earlier, for Black women entrepreneurs with the Alliance of American with the American Alliance for Equal Rights, AAER, those people, alleging that limiting applicants by race violated Section 1981 of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits racial discrimination in contracts. After a court of appeals blocked the program as a likely violation, right? The Fearless Foundation, and this was the Trump appointed judges, the Fearless Foundation settled in 2024, permanently ending the contest, significantly impacting race-conscious philanthropic efforts. So they ended the contest before it can get to the Supreme Court. They didn't appeal, because if there were to be an appeal, if they were to, since they were the defendants, if they were to appeal, it was going to go to the Supreme Court because the last ruling said that it violated the Constitution. This was a strategic move. As the article in Time outlines, and as Arian mentioned, had she appealed that to the Supreme Court, she would have lost because who is actually in the court right now? We know that the Trump appointed judges, Kavanaugh, um, and Amy Coney Barrett, right, were definitely going to side with the American Alliance for Equal Rights because those are their people, right? And then the conservative leaning judges were also going to side with the AAER. Clarence Thomas, Alito, they were going to side with the AAER. Goes without saying. I don't know what Roberts would have done, but Roberts seemed to have been leaning towards the more conservative, I would say the MAGA right when it comes to these court cases, and siding with the mandate from Project 2025. So I believe that's what would have happened. So this was very strategic on Arian Simone's part. Um, let's see. My notes are just repetitive in terms of what we talked about before. Okay, and this is the key ruling, and the legal argument. So the legal arguments by the AAER argued that this was race-based exclusion. Fearless argued, right? Fearless's argument was that the grants were part of a charity excuse me. Fearless argued that the grants were part of charitable giving and a form of protected speech aiming to bridge the funding gap for minorities and entrepreneurs. And we've seen in the Wall Street Journal article, right? The Wall Street Journal article said that though there've always been a funding gap, if you look at the numbers, just based on the numbers, I'm interpreting the numbers, just strictly the numbers alone, that the gap is even wider now. And this was the mandate from Project 2025. They were trying to widen the gap. There was no preference given to Black women. The only preference given to Black women were by Black women who had to break the glass ceiling and beat the odds to get where they were and decided to reach back and pull up other Black women. Not to give them an edge, but give them an opportunity. In the same way, you have legacy opportunities throughout colleges and universities. And as someone who recruited for interns in corporate America, every single one of those interns that was not recruited by me from my time at the HBCUs and Hispanic serving organizations and women colleges, almost every other single intern were legacy hires. Someone's dad, someone's uncle, someone's friend. The type of networks that people of color or women are not privy to for the most part. So, the key ruling in June of 2024, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the contest was a contract rather than mere charity, as it required participants to adhere to rules, including potential promotion. Therefore, it was subject to Section 1981 of the U.S. Constitution, which prohibits racial discrimination in contracting. So the outcome, as I stated before, to avoid a precedent setting U.S. Supreme Court ruling, Fearless settled, closing the grand contest by continuing to support entrepreneurs through other means. But continuing to support entrepreneurs in other means. Very smart, very strategic. I'm so happy she did that. Even though part of me wanted her to fight, part of winning a fight is knowing when a fight isn't fair and to putting it aside until you can fight another day when the fight is fair, whenever that may be. One of the things I want to also talk about is something, a trend that I've been seeing lately. And then when I did the research, I went right back again to Project 2025 and a conservative mandate, or a MAGA mandate, I should say. Um, in terms of funding for education, and this is something that my ears perked up when I heard this because oftentimes when the 47 president says certain things, it may seem silly, like, why is he saying this? But there's a reason for it. So a few months ago, I don't know if you remember, um, he made a comment that are nurses professionals, or nurses aren't even considered professionals, or they shouldn't be considered professionals, something along those lines. I know that my mom and I had a long discussion about it because my mom is a nurse, and RN has been for many years. Um, and so when he made that comment, we we laughed about it. Like, this is odd. Like, her colleagues they were all having a conversation. Like, you know, surely this doesn't make any sense. Like, this man is like has lost his mind. But when I dug deeper, I saw that there were specific suggestions, or I don't know if suggestions are the word, but verbiage, right? In terms of policy suggestions in Project 2025, like certain things that they're going to be working towards, that stated that um, who should receive a cap on funding for education and who should not. So, for example, if you're going to school to be a lawyer, a doctor, veterinarian, I think, there will be no cap on your funding, or the cap will be higher than other occupations. Or I forgot how it's actually worded, and I should have gotten the verbiage. But I just wanted to talk about this anecdotally. But essentially, either they would have no cap, or their ability to get funding would be the cap would be so high that it wouldn't even matter, right? However, nursing right? Because it's not designated. And lawyer and veterinarian and doctor is they're considered professions. But the reason why nursing is not, he was making that flippant comment about nurses not being professionals, I believe, is that in that verbiage it says that nursing is not considered a professional job. Therefore, because it's not considered a professional job, there will be a cap on funding. So, if you are a nurse or a clinical nurse, an LPN or a registered nurse who is attempting to go back to school to become a nurse anesthetist or get your nurse practitioner license, nurse anesthetists are nurses that administer anesthesia. Oftentimes, they're not doctors. They have a doctorate, but or yeah, they may have a PhD, but they're not like medical doctors. They're nurses who receive their PhD. Same difference. Um, and they administer an anesthesia. They're called nurse anesthetists. Anyways, I just wanted to give a framework for the tiers, right? In terms of like what people often go back to school for when they are a clinical nurse. You will start off as a medical assistant and go on to being maybe a licensed practical nurse and then move up to be an RN, which means that doesn't it you have your bachelor's degree, right? You have a degree, right? Or you have the clinical hours towards being a registered nurse. You are a professional, and then you can go back to school to receive a higher degree, right? A doctorate, to receive your nurse practitioner license or become a nurse anesthetist, whatever route you want to go. I believe that's how it works. My mom will know more than me, but everything I know about that career has, comes from her. So, I think I am what's the word? I'm summarizing or paraphrasing. Yeah, so if you're a nurse and you want to go back to school to receive a higher nursing degree, your educational funding will be capped. And I believe the cap is something very low, like 60,000 or something like that. When we know that education in this country is so expensive, and especially if you are going into the medical field of any sort, anything that has to do with clinicals is going to be even more expensive. So the cap it at I think the cap is around 60,000. Don't quote me on that. But they're aiming to put a cap on nurses going back to school, which will significantly disenfranchise who are the majority of nurses in the United States of America? Women. And who is the I believe is the fastest growing group of people looking to be nurses are women of color, particularly immigrants. So who is this disenfranchising? So when we look at everything in totality, let's go back to the beginning of our conversation. Let's go back to um the jobs numbers in terms of um let's go back to promotions, right? 1% of women in black women who are promoted to senior vice president compared to 4% the year before, 2024 compared to 2025. Um, let's go back to 4%. Women receive 4% of all promotions, right? But black women receive 1%. Let's go back to the 8% of black women promoted, right? Versus to C-suite versus the 1% that was promoted in 2024 compared to the year before. Let's look at the unemployment numbers for black women. I believe right now it's at about 8%, I believe. And then let's look at, don't quote me, but I think that's what I recall from the article. And let's look at the 13% of all black women who are entrepreneurs, but receiving, let me pull up the article because I want to be accurate with this. Apologies. Give me 1 second. This is important. Yeah. Let's go back to the jobs numbers. Okay. Within C-suite, black women were promoted at a rate of 1% in 2025 compared to 8% the year before. And then before that, what I mentioned was 1% of black women got elevated to senior vice president roles compared to 4% the year before. while promotions for all women held steady at 4%. And then Black female unemployment has climbed to 7.1%. I said 8%, but 7.1% as of last week from 5.5% the year before. And then Black female entrepreneurship rising to 13%, the highest among any group, but receiving the lowest in funding. So let's look at all of that. Then let's look at what's happening at the Fearless Fund, with the Fearless Fund and the American Alliance for Equal Rights and the MAGA mandate as outlined in Project 2025 for education and funding for a profession that's heavily populated by women and women of color. It seems targeted, guys. And I say this to open, to remind myself to stay aware, to stay vigilant, to stay woke, because I will refuse to unsee this. This is too obvious. As someone who was trained to look at numbers, a trained political scientist and someone with an MBA, I can't unsee this. Because when those two disciplines collide, because don't get it twisted. I know we don't like to talk about politics, but it's in everything. Look how politics is affecting our livelihoods right now. So the idea that you don't like politics, that you don't like to vote, that you don't like politicians, you gotta stop. Like, this is hold your nose and vote, but be a part of the conversation because you not voting has impacted the lives of your children, your mom, your sisters, your daughters. The moms raise the babies, the moms raise the boys. And if they don't have lucrative jobs, if they're not able to go back to school to pursue an education because they want to get a higher role or they're not able to be promoted, they're not able to earn the money they need to earn to raise a family. Black women accounted for 69% of head of household among the people that were laid off from the federal jobs, from the federal workforce. 69%. That is school tuition, that is food on the table, that is field trips, that is educational opportunities. That is a lot. That is a means to get to work, to get to school. It impacts so much of our lives. And to say that you don't vote or you're voting for someone that only has the interests of half the population. Yeah. I'm not preaching. I'm just sorry if I'm coming off as preachy. Yeah. Stay woke, guys. Don't let them like, yeah. Anyways, so I just wanted to put all of that together in a package, much like the article in the Wall Street Journal did and hand it to you, and connect the dots so that when we're having these conversations on pivot stories, that you are looking at the conversations with that vantage point. Um, these conversations are meant to inspire, yes, meant to uplift, yes. But I also want you to think about it from the vantage point of what is currently happening in our political system, in the world around us, and what the numbers say, what the trends say in terms of who is severely being impacted. by these decisions. So that's all I have for today. Again, I hope you have a wonderful week. Um, Hit me up in the comments down below. Tell me what you think about everything that, I talked about today. And tell me how you've been impacted by what's happening right now in corporate America. Um, what's happening with you business-wise in terms of, whether you're looking for funding or I don't know, let's start to form a community and really have conversations about about these topics. And yeah. Um, I hope you have a wonderful week, like I said before, and I will see you next time on Pivot Stories. My next guest is going to be someone that I've known for a very long time, and when I was talking today about young women who are younger than me, teenagers who um really inspired me, she was definitely one of them. She's now a little bit older, but she's a business owner and just mm, I don't know, like she's it. She's that girl. She's exactly who she thinks she is, okay? I can't wait for you to meet her. And I should be putting out a trailer about that episode this week, hopefully before it airs on next Sunday. So, yeah, until next time, are you ready for the pivot? Stay ready though. Stay ready. All right? All right. Have a good one.